Reformed thinking. Welcome to the deep dive, where we take your sources, peel back the layers, and pull out the surprising insights. Our aim is really to cut through all the information overload, giving you a clear grasp of truly significant ideas. Today, we're taking a close look at a collection of writings centered on Jesus' instruction to humble oneself. We're drawing primarily from John Piper's insights on, well, childlikeness, servanthood, and brokenhearted boldness. It's a really striking concept, isn't it? Blending these seemingly opposite qualities into one unified stance.
That's right. Yeah, the source material for this deep dive sketches out a pretty radical understanding of humility. It's one that quite forcefully challenges many of our, conventional ideas about what it means to be humble. Our aim here is to lay out what genuine biblical humility involves. Not just a simple definition, but how this posture, this way of being, reshapes a believer's interaction with God, with other people, and even with truth itself. And we'll also consider how this humble stance is presented not as something we generate on our own, but actually as a freely given gift from God.
Okay, let's unpack this then. When we hear the word humble, what usually comes to mind for most people? Maybe someone quiet, perhaps self-effacing, or someone who just doesn't boast about their accomplishments. But the writings we're looking at suggest Jesus' instruction to humble yourself goes far beyond these common perceptions. What makes his teaching so distinct, so different from how the world typically views humility? And where do our sort of common intuitions about humility maybe fall short?
Yeah, what's fascinating is that Piper clarifies humility isn't just a feeling of lacking merit. The recognition of our limitations and a dismissal of any idea that we've somehow earned God's kindness, that's certainly part of it. But it's even more fundamentally about feeling the presence of free grace. It also means resting like a child at rest in his father's arms. And that's not just poetic language. It paints a picture of complete reliance and peace, a resting in a goodness that is freely given, not earned. So it sets the stage for a twofold understanding of humility, both a realistic recognition of our unworthiness and a delighted reception of God's abundant provision. It's not just about what we lack, but about the overwhelming goodness that is present and available to us.
And understanding the context of Jesus' time seems really crucial here.
Absolutely. To grasp just how radical Jesus' instruction was, it's vital to see how this challenged the common understanding back then. The Greek verb for humble, tapenos, it wasn't a gentle term, not at all. In fact, it generally carried a deeply negative sense in that culture. It referred to being crushed, brought down, afflicted, or even degraded. So imagine a successful Roman leader, so unaccustomed to public acclaim and status, or maybe a proud Pharisee, revered for his meticulous adherence to the law. Imagine telling them to become tapenos.
Wow. Yeah, that wouldn't sound like self-improvement.
Exactly. It wouldn't have sounded like a gentle suggestion. It would have felt like a command to utterly dismantle their public identity and status. Like telling a CEO today to embrace, utter destitution and dependence. It was a direct assault on the prevailing values of worldly success and personal ascendancy, really challenging the very foundations upon which that society measured worth.
Okay, and that negative connotation helps explain why Jesus picked children as the model, right? Because that seems counterintuitive too.
It does, and Piper's writings really highlight this. Jesus picked children not because of any romantic qualities, not their sweetness or perceived innocence. He wasn't suggesting we imitate childishness. Instead, it was precisely because of their powerlessness and their low social standing in that culture. Children just weren't figures of respect or influence. They were, by definition, dependent and without social standing or rights of their own.
So it was their lack of status he was pointing to.
Yes, it shows that Jesus' command is a call to relinquish any love affair with status and self-sufficiency and rights and control. It means embracing a stance opposite to worldly elevation, where worth is measured by independence, self-reliance, position. The very idea of becoming like a child, in that context, was a direct confrontation to the prevailing values of the day. It turned the world's concept of greatness completely on its head.
That's a really forceful reframing of humility. Taking that concept of tapenos and Jesus' surprising choice of children, it sounds like he's asking us to completely invert our usual way of measuring worth. But if we're supposed to abandon the metrics of worldly success and reputation, where do we find true satisfaction then? Which I guess leads us to Jesus' striking statement about the kingdom.
Right, that idea of relinquishing self-sufficiency is striking.
Mm-hmm.
And it leads directly to this really impactful statement from Jesus. Unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. And that's not presented as a suggestion, is it? It's a condition for entry.
So for the listener trying to really get this, what does this alteration, this turning into a childlike state, truly involve? Is it about innocence, or is there something much deeper, maybe more challenging we need to unpack here?
Well, the sources pinpoint three central elements when drawing comparisons between disciples and children. There's lowliness, being little ones, and belief or trust. These three aspects kind of work together to form a picture of genuine childlike humility. First, that concept of lowliness, like we just discussed, it's about relinquishing control and status. It's about recognizing one's true place, not striving for an elevated position among others. It's an acceptance of a position that the world might deem insignificant, yet it's the very position Jesus holds up as the pathway to his kingdom.
And the little one's idea, what does that add?
So Jesus labels believers as little ones. This phrasing signifies they are not great in the eyes of the world, they're not strong, and not self-sufficient. They don't wield worldly might, nor do they rely on their own capabilities for standing or security. Their defining characteristic isn't worldly accomplishment or inherent strength. It's that they believe in Jesus, meaning they place their trust entirely in him rather than in themselves or any earthly advantage. So this means if you look at a group of these little ones, what you'll find is not a collection of powerful individuals, but a community united by their shared reliance on Christ.
A collective reliance.
Yes, a collective recognition that their worth and security come from outside themselves, solely from him.
Okay. And you mentioned trust as the third element.
Yes, and this seems to be the most prominent aspect, the one Piper gives considerable weight to. Trust. This is presented as the main focus. Like children in a healthy family, they trust their daddy to take care of them. And this isn't a passive trust. It's an active, unburdened confidence. They don't lie awake at night worried about upcoming meals or fret about external circumstances that might threaten their comfort or security because they know they are provided for.
It sounds like a deep sense of security.
Exactly. They are described as happy, anxiety-free, and confident that everything they need will be provided. This is a piece that stems from knowing they are cared for by an infinitely capable and loving Father. They are content simply to be cared for by their parents and are not the least bothered by a lack of worldly honor or recognition. You know, the world may not give them awards or put them in charge, but their joy isn't contingent on those things because their true satisfaction comes from their Father.
Right. But it's important to clarify, this isn't about being unproductive or immature, is it?
Absolutely crucial clarification. Jesus is not advocating for believers to be unproductive or immature. The instruction is definitely not to imitate a child's lack of output, their limited understanding, or their need for constant supervision. No, rather the central point is to avoid finding joy in a feeling of superiority over others, being stronger, more intelligent, or richer. It also teaches believers not to begrudge a lack of worldly recognition or fret over being thought lowly or foolish by the world's standards. Instead, the pursuit is to believe in Jesus the way a child believes, locating security and meaning and joy in Jesus and all that our Heavenly Father is for us in Him. So our contentment, our sense of worth, it's anchored completely in God's provision and His character. And that frees us from the endless pursuit of external validation or, frankly, the exhaustion of trying to prove ourselves to others.
It really does sound like a radical freedom from all that worldly striving, anchored instead in a complete reliance on God. This means our peace and contentment come from a source that the world often overlooks or even, well, mocks sometimes. It completely redefines what true security looks like, shifting it from what we can grasp or achieve to what God simply gives.
Okay, so when we grasp this childlike lowliness and trust, where does that lead us next? What's the practical outflow? What's the observable fruit of this kind of humility in, daily life?
Well, this poverty of spirit, this childlike trust, it naturally leads to a spirit and life of servanthood. The sources show Jesus consistently linking humility to practical acts of helpfulness. He makes it clear that true greatness is found not in being served, but in serving others.
And this wasn't an easy lesson for his disciples, was it? Not at all. This was a lesson Jesus had to teach his followers repeatedly, as the sources highlight. Jesus' disciples themselves frequently argued about who would be the greatest among them. This craving for status, for being number one, it's something deeply ingrained in us as humans, isn't it? That desire for prominence and influence, even within a group of those called to follow Christ. Jesus addressed this directly and frequently, confronting their worldly ambitions head on. You remember the instance with James and John's mother asking for the chief seats?
Right. That drive for position was a constant battle.
It was. And Jesus directly countered this inclination towards self-exaltation with, stunning clarity. He stated, if anyone will be first, he must be last of all and servant of all. And he illustrated this truth with vivid, unforgettable actions. Sometimes he did it by placing a child among them, taking this person of low social standing and declaring that receiving such a child in his name means receiving him.
A physical demonstration.
Yes, showing them that welcoming the least, the powerless, was equivalent to welcoming Christ himself. And then, of course, at the Last Supper, while his disciples were apparently still consumed by their own desires for position, debating who was greatest, Jesus performed one of the most unexpected acts imaginable. He contrasted worldly leaders who exercised lordship with his own example, demonstrating in real time what he meant.
The foot washing.
Exactly. He took a towel and a basin and washed his disciples' feet, a task reserved for the absolute lowliest household servant. Then, with that humbling act fresh in their minds, he declared, "But I am among you as the one who serves." He cut straight from the desire for human greatness and worldly acclaim to a lifestyle of lowliness and practical helpfulness. He demonstrated through his own actions what genuine leadership and true humility involve.
So what does this service truly mean then beyond that specific act? How deep does it go?
Well, Jesus himself gives the deepest meaning of this service. He came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, that definition goes far beyond simple acts of kindness or convenient favors. Service in this biblical sense involves doing things out of love that are costly to ourselves, but aim to bring temporal and eternal benefit to others. It is a costly love. It extends beyond mere acts of common courtesy to include ultimate self-sacrifice, as exemplified by his giving his very life for us on the cross.
So it's not about doing what's easy.
No, not at all. It's about a willingness to expend oneself, to pay a price for the lasting good of others.
And what's really striking is that this servanthood of Jesus doesn't end with his earthly life.
That's truly astonishing, isn't it?
Mm.
His role as a servant does not cease with his earthly ministry or his sacrifice. He actually portrays his second coming, not just with splendor and overwhelming majesty, but also as a time when he will again take on the lowly but beautiful role of servant. He states that he will dress himself for service and have them recline at table, and he will come and serve them.
Just think about that for a moment. The returning king, the Lord of all, will serve his people.
Yes. This ongoing example, this continued posture of helpfulness from the one who deserves all glory. It should really move our hearts to serve others with a similar disposition. It prompts the question for each of us: how can I do the greatest good for people who need my help no matter what it costs me? Rather than seeking human prestige or applause, it completely reframes our entire outlook on what it means to live for others, mirroring the very heart of Christ.
And this connects to the warnings about pride, doesn't it?
It does, very directly. This brings us to a crucial point about the opposition to service. Jesus repeatedly warned, "Whoever exalts himself will be humbled, and whoever humbles himself will be exalted." This highlights that self-exalting pride is clearly identified in these writings as the great service killer. It just chokes off the desire and ability to genuinely help others, because pride's primary concern is always self-promotion and self-preservation.
Whereas humility enables service.
Exactly. Conversely, Christ-dependent humility is presented as the great service maker. When our humility is rooted in Christ rather than our own efforts to be humble, it becomes the wellspring of genuine, selfless acts of care for others. It frees us to truly act for the benefit of others without the constant need for recognition or the fear of being diminished.
It really is a radical call to a life oriented outward, away from self and toward others, mirroring Christ himself. It truly shifts the paradigm of what it means to be great or successful in God's kingdom, defining it by what we give, not what we gain. Okay, that takes us to a challenging, almost paradoxical aspect of humility, especially relevant in our present time. The sources title a section, "Brokenhearted Boldness in the Cause of Truth." That's a striking phrase, isn't it? Brokenhearted boldness. In a world that often seems to suggest that firm conviction is arrogance and that being open-minded means having no definitive beliefs, how does a truly humble person speak truth? And maybe even more intriguing, what does that brokenhearted part really imply? Is it a kind of sorrow or a deep empathy or something else?
Yeah, it's a fascinating combination. This concept addresses how a humble person speaks truth, especially about ultimate reality. Our current societal climate, which you could call relativism, frequently views speaking truth with firm conviction, particularly about things that claim to be universal or exclusive, as arrogance. There's a widespread idea that all truths are equally valid, or maybe that truth is purely personal, and therefore asserting a definitive truth can be seen as judgmental or lacking in humility. This presents a real challenge for anyone seeking to live a life of both humility and conviction.
And this isn't exactly a new problem.
No, not at all. G.K. Chesterton, the writer from the early 20th century, observed this very phenomenon way back in 1908. He noted with concern that Modesty has settled upon the organ of conviction. He argued that people have reversed the appropriate order. They are doubtful about the truth, where they should be undoubting, but they assert themselves where they should be doubtful. This new humility, as he called it, is viewed in our sources as poisonous, because it makes people doubtful about their aims, potentially halting all action and purpose.
If you're not sure what's true, how can you act?
Exactly. If all beliefs are equally valid, how can you act with genuine conviction or pursue any goal with purpose? He even suggested it could lead to a mental modesty so extreme that people doubt the multiplication table.
So how does true humility support bold truth-telling then? The sources outline 5 ways.
That's right. The sources detail 5 ways true humility actually undergirds bold truth-telling, showing that this kind of conviction is far from arrogance and, in fact, requires a humble stance. First, there is subordination to God. The conviction we hold and speak flows from submitting to God's word and commands, not from self-exaltation or our own cleverness. Remember, a disciple is not above the teacher. A servant is not above the master. Our boldness to declare truth comes from recognizing that we are simply relaying what the ultimate authority, God himself, has revealed.
So it's an act of loyalty to him.
Precisely. Not a proclamation of our own wisdom or superior intellect. It's a humble act of relaying a message we ourselves are under, acknowledging its source is divine, not human.
Okay, what's the second way?
Second, humility means no right to better treatment. It accepts that if Jesus, the master of the house, was maligned and called Beelzebul, which was a truly derogatory term implying demonic association, then his followers should expect similar treatment. Therefore, humility doesn't retaliate with evil for evil. It embraces a sacrificial life, not one fixated on perceived rights or demanding fair treatment. So when we speak truth and are met with hostility, insults, or even outright hatred, humility means we don't demand better because our master faced worse.
That perspective enables endurance, doesn't it? Without bitterness.
It does. It frees us from the need to protect our own reputation at all costs.
And the third point?
Third, truth is asserted as service and love. Truth is not spoken to bolster one's ego or to, triumph in debate over an adversary. Instead, it is spoken as a service to Christ and as love to the adversary. It is about sharing what Jesus taught without fear, because it is ultimately for the good of the listener, even if it's initially unwelcome.
So the goal isn't winning, it's faithful delivery.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Faithful delivery of a message of life and reality out of genuine care for others and unflinching fidelity to Christ.
Number 4.
Fourth, humility entails dependence on grace. A humble person recognizes complete reliance on God's grace for all knowing, believing, and speaking. And this is where that broken-hearted aspect starts to make more sense. It means speaking truth from a place of recognizing our own deep need for God's grace, our own inherent fallibility, our own past or present struggles with sin.
Which leads to a certain demeanor.
Yes, it yields a demeanor that is neither cocky nor timid. Knowing we can do nothing apart from him means any clarity, insight, or courage we possess comes from a source outside ourselves, a divine gift. This dependence prevents the boastfulness that comes from relying on one's own faculties, and it prevents the timidity that comes from a fear of failure or self-doubt. It grants a steady, quiet confidence, because our effectiveness comes from God, not from ourselves.
Okay, and the 5th point brings it together.
Fifth and finally, humility embraces fallibility alongside conviction. While acknowledging human fallibility and maintaining openness to criticism and learning, humility also holds that God provides for human conviction. Now, this isn't a contradiction, but a balanced approach.
Yeah.
We hold firmly to what God has revealed as true, ready to share it with the world, yet we remain open to learning and correction in our own understanding. This means we are called to persuade others and make disciples of all nations, teaching them Jesus' commands, even while being ready to receive correction for ourselves, to refine our understanding, and to grow.
So it's a confident conviction, but one that allows for growth and refinement, not rigid.
Exactly. It's boldness rooted in a deep self-awareness that we are, after all, just clay in the potter's hands.
This really shows that real humility isn't passive or weak at all. It's an active, grace-dependent stance that stands for truth in a world that might strongly resist it. It challenges us to reconsider what true strength and genuine conviction really look like, revealing them to be rooted in God, not in ourselves. Okay, this has been a really compelling look at what humility involves in its various facets, from that childlike trust to costly service and even this brokenhearted boldness in truth-telling. But this leads us to the crucial question, really. How do we achieve it? Is it something we can just decide to do, a matter of just trying harder to be less proud, maybe? How do we cultivate this kind of character in our own lives?
Oh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And this final section of our material addresses a really crucial point. True humility cannot flow directly from a sheer act of self-renouncing will.
Hmm.
There's a paradox here. If we somehow manage to achieve humility through our own striving, through an act of sheer willpower to be less, we risk feeling proud of that very accomplishment.
Right, the moment you think, wow, I'm being really humble, you've kind of lost it.
Exactly. The moment we become aware of our humility, it ceases to be true humility because it becomes a source of self-exaltation. The sources conclude that genuine humility is a gift beyond our reach. It's not a technique we master, but something granted by God.
So how is it described then if it's a gift?
It is described as the gift to receive all things as a gift thankfully and unself-consciously. It's not something we generate or force upon ourselves, but something received as a freely given grace. This perspective shifts the burden from our strenuous effort to God's boundless generosity. It allows us to simply accept what is given without feeling self-congratulatory about it. And this understanding is crucial to escaping that pride trap inherent in trying to attain humility through our own willpower. If we try to make ourselves humble, we just end up becoming proud of our humility.
And the author connects this to his own struggles.
He does. He shares a personal reflection on this struggle, noting his own battle with the pleasure of being made much of, an insidious craving for human praise and recognition that I think many of us can relate to. He proposes that the most effective solution, the true final solution to this struggle for humility, is actually to focus on making much of God. And this connects to a truly, well, revolutionary concept from the sources called Christian hedonism, which at first glance might sound like a contradiction in terms.
Christian hedonism, how does that work?
It's summarized like this. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him.
Okay, unpack that a bit. God is most glorified when we are most satisfied in him.
Right. Think about that for a moment. It's not about pursuing superficial worldly pleasures or selfish desires. Not at all. Instead, it's about discovering that our deepest, most enduring joy isn't found in accolades or status, or even in the feeling of being humble itself, but in the infinite worth and beauty of God himself. The striking insight here is that when your heart is truly captivated by God's glory, when he becomes your ultimate satisfaction, those insidious cravings for self-exaltation, for human praise, for control, those very things that destroy humility, they simply begin to fade.
Because you found something far better.
Precisely. It's a radical freedom from the exhausting treadmill of self-promotion because you found a far superior divine satisfaction that crowds out all those lesser desires.
So the focus shifts entirely.
Yes. It means making delighting in Jesus Christ the great pursuit of his life, because that is seen as the way to show Jesus is the most glorious reality in the universe. It's about cultivating such a deep, soul-satisfying pleasure in God's glory that all other desires for self-exaltation simply lose their appeal. It is in this speechless, all-satisfying admiration of God's glory that the end of self truly arrives. When our hearts are completely ravished by the wonder and goodness of God, the insidious motive of seeking our own praise just loses its hold. The focus shifts entirely from self to the infinite goodness and beauty of God. And in that shift, humility is found, almost as a byproduct of delight, not as a goal to be achieved by sheer human will.
So humility isn't about trying harder to be less or to squash yourself down. It's about delighting more in the one who is everything. It shifts our gaze from self to God, from our own supposed worth to his infinite worth and beauty. That offers a pathway out of a profound human dilemma, doesn't it? A way to be truly free.
Wow. Okay, so today we've really dug into what it truly means to humble yourself in childlikeness, servanthood, and brokenhearted boldness. We saw that genuine humility means recognizing the presence of free grace, like a child trusting their parent, accepting their low social standing, and finding their security in the Father's care rather than in their own strength or worldly recognition.
Mm-hmm. And we also considered how this childlike lowliness and radical trust lead naturally to a life of serving others with costly love, following Jesus' own example of self-sacrifice and that outward orientation. And we heard how humility is vital for proclaiming God's truth with conviction, even when it is countercultural, but always rooted in subordination to God and sincere care for others. That brokenhearted boldness. Right. And finally, we discovered that true humility is actually a gift. It's a state where our greatest satisfaction in God becomes the very avenue for his greatest glorification in us. It's not about our striving to be humble, but about our delight in him becoming so all-encompassing that self-exaltation just loses its grip.
So as we wrap up, what really stands out to you from this deep dive? How might cultivating this kind of humility through the gift of God's grace and this pursuit of satisfaction in Him, how might that reshape your view of greatness, maybe your acts of helpfulness to others or your stance on truth? Consider maybe how this pursuit of satisfaction in God could begin to diminish those desires that so often hinder our lives, those desires for status, for control, and for self-exaltation, something to really mull over.
Definitely food for thought. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, keep seeking those significant insights.